Hey everyone, welcome back. Day number 3 here at SEMA for myself and James. Thank you for joining me. My name is Danny Gredenberg with the Database Enhancement Gateway, joining with my good friend here, James. James, we met a few years ago, and you work for a company. You guys got some pretty cool stuff here, but I really want to talk about some things that are really important to the collision repair process, which is the corrosion protection.
Yep.
Obviously, you guys got a product that's pretty innovative, right, when it comes down to corrosion protection. But I think we should kind of talk to the repairers today, just kind of reinforcing that is, what exactly is the corrosion protection, and what are some things as a repair we can do to do a better job with it and not just think about, some of the common things out there, just putting a primer down on the car. So, James, go ahead and introduce yourself and kind of tell everyone here what's your story with the product and stuff.
Yeah, so I'm James Shoup. I'm the technical manager for Car Rep Automotive. We manufacture 2K aerosol products with unlimited pot life that are totally changing the game in the automotive industry to allow the proper corrosion protection to be applied during the collision process without having to tie up a booth, go to a gun, but still honor those OEM statements that 2K epoxy has to be on bare metal, no questions asked.
Okay, so when I'm thinking about a spray can, when I'm thinking about products out of a spray can, the first thing that comes to mind is a 1K product.
Correct.
And I'm thinking, well-through primer. Okay, that's a 1K product, right?
Correct.
It's got zinc in there. Now, there's some other types of primers that I also think are commonly overlooked in the industry. We know about them, but we kind of we kind of missed that mark or missed that step. So let's first talk about like the corrosion protection process and why that's. I think we have a little thing here, but as we get the slides pulled back up here, we'll be able to identify, kind of what's the purpose of corrosion protection on metals and why that's so important. So why do we do this?
Obviously the go-to reason for corrosion protection is obviously appearance.
Yep.
Nobody wants to see rust on their car. Nobody wants to have a car repaired and then you see rust after the repair is done. That's the obvious. The elephant in the room that nobody talks about, nobody really speaks about is the safety of it. When it comes down to safety points, any corrosion around a seam or, a weld, at some point, if there's no corrosion protection, that becomes a safety hazard. There's going to be a weak spot at that point, and that's not going to turn out too well for your customer or, the OEM statement that this is the way to do it, the way to properly repair it, and if there's no corrosion protection, then it turns into a bad situation, and no questions asked.
So rust to me is cancer to a car, right?
Absolutely.
The moment it starts, it's not stopping unless you get rid of it by cutting it out, right?
Right.
And at that point, a catastrophic failure could occur.
Absolutely.
So when we're thinking about corrosion, is corrosion just something that can happen on just steel only, or is it something that you see more and more with aluminum, and is aluminum more susceptible to it?
It's always been steel, but now that the cars are coming out with a lot of aluminum or mostly aluminum, absolutely 100% corrosion is a question when it comes down to aluminum, because aluminum can corrode as well.
Okay, so now we're thinking about putting a product as an isolator or a barrier in between like the aluminum or versus in between aluminum and steels, right? We want to make sure those areas are treated to prevent what, moisture? Is that the biggest cause?
Yeah, moisture is the #1 cause of corrosion, as well as oxygen. When it comes down to bare metal, it takes, within 60 minutes, it's already starting to corrode whether you can see it or not. So that's where corrosion protection comes into play, and you got to get that bare metal sealed off, and it can happen even quicker when it comes down to aluminum.
Okay, so now we're thinking about putting corrosion protection products down, right? So
Yes.
Let's get into thinking about the when we do this, and at what point of the repair, would an estimator want to start thinking about this discussion with the technician, and when the technician starts to, get this product and wants to put it down, what are some things that they should be thinking about in the process?
They should be thinking about getting it on as quick as possible. When you start to strip down a car for a repair and it's in bare metal, it's already starting to corrode. So you've got to get that corrosion barrier, that moisture barrier on there every step of the way through the process, or you're asking for corrosion at some point.
So I'm thinking right here, you provide some great examples, showing how, you want to put that corrosion protection barrier before you apply things that are preventing corrosion to begin with, like seam sealers, right?
Correct.
So, on top of providing that barrier right there, does it provide any other benefits to that seam sealer?
Well, there's been a lot of DTM seam sealers out there. Absolutely can stick to bare metal, but the problem is once you start to lay a bead of seam sealer down, you're trapping moisture. So that's now where the epoxy comes into play. Always have seam sealer over top of an epoxy to eliminate that possibility.
So, I come from, Colorado where it's dry. Here in Vegas, it's pretty dry.
Right.
Now, I've been to some parts of the country where it's pretty wet year round, just in the environment. How does that play an effect, those humid environments?
Human environments definitely comes into play in that situation. There's only the higher humidity, the quicker it's going to flash rust and start to corrode. And that's where the epoxies come into play to totally eliminate that. And I see so many shops that they've got cars sitting around in different stages of repair, and there's just bare metal everywhere.
Yeah.
In some states, once you strip that car down to bare metal, the corrosion's already there.
Right. Now, so for those of you in the audience, he mentioned the word DTM, right? So
Correct.
DTM, we call that as direct to metal. And a lot of the manufacturers, they may offer some sort of product out there, but the OEMs don't necessarily approve direct to metal, right? So we want to put that barrier, like an epoxy primer, on that bare substrate. Now, when I'm also thinking about corrosion protection, I'm also thinking about, how it's going to, survive on the longevity of it, right? So, what is that, what's the goal here with the product that we're using? Is it just to get it out the door, or is it just to, or is it like a long life situation?
Epoxies have always been created to be a very durable, long-lasting product, which is why that's where the foundation starts. It's always got to be an epoxy, because that's going to be the proper ground build. Your paint job is only as good as your ground. So whenever you're using products that aren't proper to the repair, then you're not doing a proper service for your customer, because that is going to fail or fall apart or decrease in longevity. So that's where a proper 2K epoxy would fall into play to create that proper repair and the longevity of that vehicle.
Okay. So in your experience, when you're out in the shop and you're talking with technicians and you're looking with talking with managers of shops, they're obviously wanting to do the best job they can. What are some reasons that you hear out there that they may not want to use like an epoxy primer? Is it because they're just not aware? Is it just and how can we change that mindset to show them that this is the way to do it? Like what are some things that you see out there, and what can you tell them?
A lot of shops that I see, obviously they're using 1K products that they shouldn't be using. And a lot of times the reason why they're using those 1K products is because they don't want to mix up an epoxy and spray it out of a gun if they only have a small spot to do, because normally they're not going to spray an entire car, because that's not what the repair is. It's
right.
Spot repair, small spots here, there. So they don't want to mix up an epoxy out of a gun and then have gun time, booth time, cleanup time, waste, because they always mix up more than they need. So a lot of them will settle for a 1K product because it's quick, it's easy, but it is not doing a service for your customer. So once they see the benefit of an epoxy and how to use an epoxy properly and know that they are doing the correct job all the way through the process, then they understand, hey, I'm doing a better service for my customers.
Okay, so they're probably having someone telling them that a 1K is sufficient, but then there might be not referencing back the OEM manual that says you must use a 2K product, or you must use like an epoxy primer before you apply these seam sealers or anything
Correct.
on the vehicle. So, I mean, this is all good stuff here. So, like, exactly, if you can share with us, what are some benefits to epoxy? How does that work? What are some things that we can share to a repairer, beyond just it's a primer? I mean, what can you do to explain it that way it makes sense on why that epoxy is so important?
So, when it comes down to an epoxy primer, epoxy is the next closest thing to factory E-coat. So, if you're going to have damaged factory E-coat or remove factory E-coat, the only way to apply a product to imitate what is on that car from factory is epoxy, no questions asked. So, the benefits of an epoxy is it is not porous like a urethane primer. That's where the water barrier comes into play. So that's when you spray an urethane primer, being porous, you should 100% have an epoxy underneath of it to create that corrosion barrier and that water barrier.
Okay, and I'm seeing here that it also creates some sort of adhesion benefits, right? So,
Correct.
Do things stick on better to epoxy primers?
Epoxies are normally generated for proper adhesion, direct to bare metal, as well as putting other things over top of it, because they are a little slower to cure, but that is for a reason. The slower they cure, the better quality result you get. So you put seam sealers over it, body work over it. Body work should be done on epoxy primer, not on bare metal, because body fillers tend to get hot and heat up, and once that heat starts, you're creating moisture. So by putting body filler and seam sealers over an epoxy, that is the correct way to do it all the way through a process.
So yeah, I mean that's an interesting thing there, because I think a lot of body shops out there will use some sort of body filler, right? And when they section in a panel at that welded seam, or maybe they're repairing a dent, and then so now you're thinking about putting an epoxy primer before your body filler, right? And there's
Correct.
a process involved there to create an isolated barrier.
Correct.
And then you talked about like a seam sealer, right? You want to put that seam sealer over a primed surface, whether it be E-coat or an epoxy primer, right?
100%.
So now when we're thinking about that adhesion process, right, and we think about removing the moisture, I mean, I would have never thought that body filler can create, heat to that degree to create the moisture, and obviously we want to contain that quickly, right?
Yes.
So is this a repeat effort in the process? Is this going to be something you're going to be doing multiple times possibly?
Yeah, if you got body filler on whether it's a primer or bare metal, and you start blocking your primer, you always have bare metal spots showing after the blocking, and that's where epoxy comes into play, that you need to have epoxy back on that bare metal. But if shops aren't doing that, that heat has already created corrosion because it's created moisture. So by getting rid of that corrosion and sealing it off with an epoxy every step of the way, you've done a service for your customer.
So I'm thinking about this is another thing that I think happens. Technicians working on an area, break hits, right? Lunchtime hits. Would it be a recommended good thing to do, go back and hit those bare metal areas with some epoxy before you go to lunch, or maybe over the weekend, you come back on Monday? Would that be a good idea to, protect that area exposed?
Absolutely. I always recommend, if you're going to walk away from a project and there's bare metal showing, it's got to have epoxy on it, because the longer it sits there in bare metal, the more the corrosion is already growing.
So now let's talk about some of the products out there. And Car Rep has done something new with being able to apply it without having to go and mix all these things.
Correct.
So how can we break down the walls that epoxy is available to them in their stage or in their stall? So what is it we can think about now with these new products?
Yeah, epoxies out of the gun, amazing, amazing products, proper for a collision repair in every shop. But to me, those products are meant for a larger repair, whether it's the whole side of a car or a rooftop or whatever the case may be. But now that we have the unlimited pot life epoxies that you can use on the shop floor, everything can be cut in ahead of time. Like you said, get that epoxy on that bare metal, whether you're walking away from it for lunch, shoot that ahead of time, get that spray, get that primer on there to seal off that bare metal, and then once you come back from lunch or whatever the case is, then you can move on. That can go to the paint department.
Yep.
And everything's already done ahead of time for that painter, so it's creating more efficiency. It's speeding things up in the shop. It's organizing everything in the shop. And by getting rid of all the 1K products like your etch primer, your weld-through primer, your 1K primers, your 1K E-coats, using these 2K products is eliminating SKUs for you, but it's also honoring those OEM statements to allow you to do the proper repair every step of the way.
Excellent. Now, in terms of thinking about the material of it, I'm a repair planner. I'm thinking about how do I capture this? How do I document the need for it, right? So I'm going to capture the materials, because the materials are never included in my published times, whether I'm welding a panel in or if I'm thinking about a repair panel. I'm going to now think about this step of the way, right, in the process, and even their cost involved, to ensure that we can get that, added onto the work order, right?
Right.
So now I'm going to think about some other things, doing it right. The manufacturer. The manufacturer ultimately dictates the repair, or they're the Bible, right?
Absolutely.
So with that, some manuals may be very, very clear. Some of them are not. I know Toyota is very clear on using epoxy primer. I know some of the other manufacturers state to use the epoxy primer. So just because a manufacturer doesn't call it out, is that a substitute? Does that mean you don't have to do it?
No, because all you're doing is creating a improper repair. And normally when I see that happen is, well, I don't have to do it by the books on this specific car, but now it starts to snowball, and now they're doing it on every car, and they're breaking the rules. Every manufacturer has that statement, but by doing it on one car and thinking they got away with it, now they're doing it on every car, and it's incorrect.
Absolutely. Now, what about backside of a panel, like the area that you don't see? I've been told over my career, it's just the backside, you'll never see it. I mean, whether it's exposed, bare metal, or even if it's left in just e-coat, is that still alone worth it? I mean, can you leave those areas untreated on the backside?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. And the reason is because once you've got untreated metal on the backsides or untreated aluminum on the backsides, that corrosion, you don't see it right away, but there's no stopping it. It grows and grows and grows, and that's why cars fall apart, because normally that corrosion started in a place that you don't see. So it has to be treated. Every square inch of that car has to be treated. If you want that car to last, and get your money's worth out of that car, or go to a reputable shop, you want to have that state of mind that they're doing it correctly. And if they're cutting corners by applying 1K products or not spraying the backs of panels, you're not gonna have a good business relationship with a customer like that.
Absolutely.
It's failing and down the road.
Okay. Now, what about the appearance of it? I mean, is epoxy just white? I mean, is there different colors? Can we tint it? Can we make it look like the factory? I mean, what are some things that a repair can look into in that point?
Yeah, normally epoxies come in black, gray, and white. What we've done as a manufacturer in our 2K epoxies, we've generated the E-coat colors, all 9 E-coat colors, into an epoxy. So now you can use our E-coats directly as your epoxy every step of the way. So if a car comes in and it calls for olive green E-coat at the end of the repair, you would take our olive green E-coat and use it every step of that repair. That way you've got the corrosion protection every step of the way. And so now we've got all the E-coat colors generated as an epoxy.
So I'll tell you, one of my frustrations when I see an estimate is when I see that line E-coat on the estimate. It's not E-coat, we're using an epoxy primer. So should we identify it as an epoxy primer?
Absolutely.
So it's, and that's one of the misconceptions out there is what they label, it's like E-coat in a can or whatever it is, but it's really, we need to call it an epoxy primer to define what the process or the product that we're using, because corrosion protection is more of a process, not an individual product, right?
Correct.
So with that, like I said, I think it's a really important process. James, I couldn't thank you enough for your experience, your expertise. I mean, you've shown me hands-on, how, things can fail prematurely, and, the catastrophic, failure, we don't want that to happen, whether it's on our cars, but more importantly, the customer's car, right? That's a safety in mind.
Exactly.
We think about how that vehicle is going to survive the longevity. So, with that, I want to thank you. Again, you're a wealth of knowledge on when it comes down to corrosion protection. Again, you got some great solutions. You got some great products that can bring that process and encourage more use of it. And if you can just, tell a shop, to adopt this process, well, how would you summarize that?
It's all about education.
Education.
Education, 100%. That drives the industry, and that's the only way to get the proper word out there to get things done correctly.
Would you say culture is another big thing in the shop?
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
Okay, so with that, I want to leave it at that. Education, culture, get the training, apply this. Don't be scared of it. Learn something new, do something different. Give that customer a peace of mind. And James, I appreciate your time, and I hope you have a great show this weekend.
You as well, and I appreciate the time.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.